Hi, if you're new to the channel, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. Now, this is a chore video, so what I'm going to be doing is some chores on the boat. And one of the chores that I need to do is give it a bit of a wash and a bit of a clean down. Now, I started this back in the spring and I got sort of the whole boat done. I washed the whole of the outside, got all of the muck off it from the winter, all the grime that had accumulated, and then I was going to give it a polish and a wax, and I never got around to doing the polish and the wax because, well, things just sort of got out of hand. I had other things that I needed to do. Anyway, spring has gone, summer has gone, and now I really need to give the boat another wash down, and this time hopefully I'll get around to doing the polishing and the waxing of the boat. Now the thing is, the boat is desperately in need of it. If we take a look at the boat, we'll see that it's picked up quite a few scuff marks over the summer. I didn't get out much in it because of the closure of the canals, but it picked up quite a few scuff marks. It's quite dirty, and it's not helped by the fact that this side of the boat is facing into the sun, and as a result has really been baked this summer because it's been so hot. It really does need a clean. The local ducks have been using it for target practice, which hasn't helped. There's mucky footprints on the roof, and basically the boat just needs a good wash, a good clean down before we go any further. The long-term aim here is to actually give the boat a fresh coat of paint at some point. The boat was built in 2007 and had a repaint, as far as I can tell, around about 2014, 2015. It also had some work done on the roof around, I think, last year or the year before, and also the well decks. And I had it blacked last year when I bought the boat. So it really does need a repaint. I'll hopefully get around to getting it repainted at some point. It's a question of finding the money and finding the time to get that done. So anyway, this video, if you want to know how not to wash a boat and how not to prepare a boat for polishing and how not to polish it and how not to apply wax, this is the video for you. Learn through my mistakes so you don't make them. Hi, future me here, interrupting myself. Now, throughout this video is a sort of trial and error approach to polishing the narrowboat. And through sort of experimentation and trying to work out what I should be doing, I finally came up with a method at the end that actually worked for me. So if you watch through to the end of the video, or watch just even the last section of the video, you'll find the method that I came up with to actually polish the narrowboat and get a really, what I consider, good finish. One of the things I'm quite worried about is the paint does seem to be quite thin in places. As I said, it's been on there for a good 10 plus years, I think, or around about 10 years, and it does seem to be quite thin. It may have been sort of polished and waxed a lot in the past, and so really does need that repaint. I guess I'll find out when I get around to actually polishing it and waxing it. Okay, so let's get this boat washed. And this is something that I think even I can get right. I start off with some nice hot water, mix it in a bit of cold, and then use a detergent that I found on board the boat, which seems to be specifically designed for washing boats. Mix it all together and start washing. Okay, I wish the washing of the boat was this quick, but this is me washing the boat. I washed it down and then I gave it a couple of rinses with cold water, and it got a lot of muck off the boat, which was great. Washing the boat down removed a lot of the dust and muck and took out some of the minor scratches that were just sort of scuff marks. However, it did reveal that the boat really did need to be re-waxed and polished. Okay, so it's blowing an absolute gale outside, which means I really can't record outside. It's far too windy, so I'm in the boatsman's cabin. Now I've given the side of the boat 2 wash downs with warm soapy water using some detergent that I found on board that's supposedly for boats, and then I gave it 2 rinses with cold water. Interestingly, after the second rinse, there was still something coming off the side. The water at the end of the second rinse still looked sort of very cloudy, sort of almost as though there was this very fine white particulate suspension in there. So I've got no idea what that was or what was going on. So what I'm going to do today is apply the compound to clean the paintwork and hopefully restore some of its shine and some of its colour. Now the procedure I'm following I've based on something that I saw online on a narrowboat channel called Narrowboat Natterings by a bloke called I believe Lumpy, if I've got that wrong, apologies, Lumpy, in which he actually washed down with this sort of waterless wash and wax, wash things down, and then using a handheld sort of polishing device applied the compound, this particular compound here. He did a lot of tests. He tested T-Cut, which is the one I would have used, I must admit. He used T-Cut and he reckoned he got the best results from this. I've looked into this in some depth and a lot of people seem to be using it. I've watched countless hours of people cleaning boats, cleaning cars, doing all kinds of things with this and these things, and hopefully it's going to work for me. Now the reason I actually picked this one is because it's the only one I saw on Amazon where somebody specifically mentioned polishing a narrowboat. So I thought, well, if they've done it, possibly I can do it. I've decided to put this sort of lumpy pad on there because some people seem to be using a lumpy pad, some people seem to be using a straight sort of foam pad. I don't really know what the difference is between the two. So what I'm going to do is I will film bits of this outside if I can because of the weather, the wind. Is I'm going to apply a small amount of this to the pad, sort of 5 dots around the pad, and then sort of squish that on to an area of about 2 feet by 2 feet, 60 centimeters by 60 centimeter, and then work backwards and forwards across it, up and down 3 times. And I'm basing that on what I've watched for the promotional videos for the company that makes this stuff and also what other people have been doing. So hopefully this is going to work, but we'll see. So let's give it a go. Let's see what happens. Okay, so I gave the side of the boat a quick wash down with the waterless wash mixture, sprayed it on and then wiped it off using a microfibre cloth. And considering I'd given the boat a couple of washes with warm soapy water and at least 4 rinses, it was surprising how much dirt was on the microfibre cloth. Once I had dried the side of the boat down with a microfibre cloth, I applied 5 drops of the compound to the pad, dabbed the pad 5 times over the 2 foot by 2 foot or 60 centimetre by 60 centimetre area that I wished to use the compound, and then started working the compound into the boat. Now I must admit that sort of knobbly pad that I was using I found very, very difficult to control. It sort of bounced all over the surface of the boat and I wasn't particularly happy with the sort of finish and coverage that I was getting. It was really quite sort of hard work. So I decided to start again with a different pad. The pad that I picked had the same sort of hardness, consistency of the foam, but it didn't have the sort of knobbly ridges on it. And again, what I did was I put 5 drops of the compound on the pad and then dabbed the pad over the 2 foot by 2 foot, 60 centimetre by 60 centimetre area, and then worked backwards and forwards, up and down across the area. This pad I felt worked much better and was much easier to control, and I was getting a more consistent finish. So I just worked backwards and forwards, up and down and across the area until I felt that I had done all that I could do. I then used a microfibre cloth to remove the compound from the side of the boat. Now what I learned here was that it was important to get this compound off before it dried. if it dried, it was very, very difficult to move. And as you can see, it's already making the side of the boat shinier. You can see a better reflection in it. I then repeated this process along the length of the boat. 5 dabs of compound on the pad, and then 5 dabs of the pad over the area that I wish to work on, and then work the compound into the paintwork by just going backwards and forwards across the boat. I then removed the compound using a microfibre cloth. Okay, so that's basically day 2 of the cleaning and polishing process completed. On day 1, what I did was I washed the boat down twice with warm soapy water and then rinsed it twice. And at the end of the rinse, I was still getting that sort of whitish stuff in the water. On day 2, what I was doing was I was washing it again with this stuff. It worked really, really well, and I used, well, all that doing one side of my 57-foot narrowboat. And as I say, this stuff was pretty good. I would spray it on and then wipe down with a microfibre cloth, and I also used it again later when I had some problems with the compound drying out. I then put on the compound, and I used pretty much a full bottle of this down one side of the boat. What I discovered with this compound was that it says in the instructions, don't use it on warm or hot surfaces, try and avoid basically sunlight, I guess. And although it was a cloudy day, it was incredibly windy, and this stuff was drying out very, very quickly in the wind. And so it made sort of spreading it around quite difficult. Also, I think at the beginning I was quite tight in using this. I wasn't putting too much on the pad, and therefore it would sort of almost sort of vanish into the paintwork, and I wasn't sort of getting it spread around. What I discovered was that if I re-wetted the paintwork, because it was drying out, that turned out to be the problem with this stuff, and I don't know if that was a good idea or not to re-wet it with this stuff. Then what happened was I could get a better sort of spread of it. So I'd put the stuff on, move it across with the polisher, across and up and down, get it going across the area, and then when it started to dry out, I squirt a bit of this on and then sort of continue going over it. Now initially I started off with that sort of bumpy, waffly, sort of coney type sort of pad, and that turned out to be a mistake because I couldn't control the polisher. In the end, I went to this sort of pad here. It's a sort of quite a firm pad, and it's described as being used for the application of compounds such as this. I'd put the spots on here, dip it around, and then work it around. I found on this device that one battery did about half the side of the boat. It ran for sort of a couple of hours or so, I suppose, and the whole side of the boat took me between 4 and 5 hours to do, with running this, putting it on, and then buffing off the compound with these microfibre cloths. One of the things I discovered is I had a pack of, I think, 10 of these microfibre cloths, and I certainly needed more. I sort of ran out halfway down, or 3/4 of the way down the boat, so I need to get some more of those along with this stuff, and there's links to all of this stuff in the description below. Now the next stage is to wax a boat, and I'm going to use this wax here. Same process basically. I will be using a much softer pad to this one. I've got some softer pads around here somewhere. I use a much softer pad, spread this around, and then buff it off with a microfibre cloth. Now I've been along and had a look at the boat, and I'm a little bit disappointed. In places it still seems quite patchy, and if you look at it carefully you can see that there are some areas where I don't think I've done a particularly good job of using the compound. The paintwork's still a little bit dull, and you've sort of got this light grey, dark greyish sort of thing. It's not hugely noticeable, you have to look for it, but you can see it there. So I might have a think about what to do about that. Anyway, my sort of take home from what I did the other day was that this stuff works well. It's amazing what comes off it. I mean, the colour of these cloths when I sort of went to wipe it down was astounding. It was astonishing what came off. This stuff was incredibly useful for cleaning the surface. I washed it before, as I said, but then cleaning it on the day that I was actually using the compound. and it worked well. As I say, this bottle did most of one side, and I've used pretty much a full bottle of this going down one side. So that's where we stand. So next thing is to put the wax on, and let's see how that goes. Change of plans. Now, the original plan was that I was going to go out there today and put the wax on, but when I got out there and had a look at the side of the narrowboat, I wasn't particularly impressed with the job that I had done earlier in the week with the compound. Now, I said that I'd used most of this compound down the side of the boat on sort of one pass. Actually, I hadn't. I've now done 2 passes down the boat with this compound, and I've still got compound left. Now, what I did this time, which was different, and it has given me a much better finish, is I used a wool pad on here, not a foam one. And what this has done is give a much better finish. I was able to really sort of cut into the sort of dull paint and sort of bring the shine back. Also, it meant that more of the compound seemed to go onto the side of the boat, because I'd put 3 or 4 splodges on here, around with it, and I was getting good coverage. Now, it could have been helped by the weather today, which is overcast, it's grey, it sort of keeps threatening to rain. It's not so windy, so the compound wasn't drying out. But also, and I think this is a key thing, is that the foam that I was using, which was the sort of correct foam, quite a stiff foam, was sucking up a lot of that compound, and as a result of it sucking up the compound, there was less to put around the boat. Anyway, using this pad, the compound, I was able to go down the whole side of the boat again in about 2 hours, and on 1 battery on this, which I was really pleased about. Obviously this is not running the full 2 hours. It's, you know, put that on, and then using a microfibre cloth here, which as you can see now are particularly dirty. I've got a whole bunch of them here. What's that? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cloths, and you can really sort of see how absolutely incredible what gets taken off. And then polishing off the compound with these cloths. Anyway, I've now done the whole side of the boat again, and I think it looks way better. I've got a sort of more consistent, even sort of shine and finish to the paintwork, which I'm really quite happy with. And all I need to do now is wax it and have a look at the final result. So anyway, as I said, change in plans. These things happen. But I learned a valuable lesson. Don't use foam. Use one of these sort of wool or synthetic wool pads on your polisher. There you go. Okay, so having used the compound on the side of the boat, the next thing to do was polish the paintwork. And for that I used the polish on a blue pad, and I'll say more about the pad that I'm using towards the end of this video. I made a cross with the polish and then put 3 or 4 dots onto the pad. I then dabbed the pad onto the side of the boat, and again I worked in a sort of 2 foot by 2 foot, 60 centimetre by 60 centimetre square area, and I just kept working the polish into the boat. I went up and down, across, sideways, until I'd worked that polish into the paintwork. I did find that I needed more polish on the pad than I originally thought, and for later sections that I was polishing, I did start off with more polish on the pad than I showed you initially. Once I'd finished polishing, you guessed it, I wiped it down with a microfibre cloth. I then repeated the process down the length of the boat. So after 2 washes of the boat with warm soapy water, with each wash followed by 2 rinses and a wash down with a waterless system, followed by 2 goes with compound, the second go using a synthetic wool pad, followed by polishing, and then followed by the application of wax, I think I ended up with a pretty good finish on the boat. I was pleasantly surprised. It looked shiny. a lot of the scuff marks were gone. Well, all of the scuff marks were gone, and I'd restored a nice shine to the boat. Really pleased with the outcome. So what was the final approach I came up with for polishing the side of my narrowboat? Well, as I said at the start of the video, I gave the boat a wash down at the start and then went over it again with this material here using these sort of microfibre cloths, and that I found really sort of cleaned up the paintwork nicely, and it got that sort of really weird dull hazy stuff off it, this sort of powder that I kept finding in the water when I was doing the washing. Once I had done that, I then moved on to using this compound here. I applied it with this sort of rotary device here, and I'll say more about the pads I use shortly. I applied this compound in very small areas, sort of 2 feet by 2 feet roughly, worked it across and in various directions, and made sure that it didn't dry out. So I didn't do it on a sunny day, and I tried to avoid days that were too windy as well, because that really seemed to dry it out. So I worked the compound on, and then I removed it with these microfibre cloths. And you can't have too many of these microfibre cloths. I got through so many of these. You can wash them, obviously, but you know, you've got to wait for them to dry if you wash them. I think I've got about 10 or 20 of these now for doing one side of the boat. After I'd used the compound, I then went back over with polish, this polish here. And this worked really, really well. And this sort of, basically, as the name says, it polished the surface. The compound removed oxidation and sort of the dullness and got down to a sort of lower paint level, took the sort of top level off, I suppose, is one way of viewing it. And then I polished that new exposed material with this polish here. And then once I had polished it, again, I used these cloths to clean up the polish, remove it. And if I didn't do that correctly or enough, what I'd find is when I came back to the boat a few hours later or the next day, you could see streaks of polish or streaks of compound. You just have to go over it again with those cloths. Once I'd polished the boat, I then used this wax and applied the wax to it with the rotary device again. And then once I had applied the wax, I then went over it again, you guessed it, with these microfibre cloths. So that was the sort of approach I took. Now, one problem I had with all these different sort of compounds and polishes and waxes was what pads to use, because there are so many different pads that you can actually use for this. I mean, I've just got a sort of small selection of them here. And it was quite confusing as to which pad I should use with which product. And the rotary device here, this sort of polisher here, did come with pads, but it didn't really say what each pad did. So in the end, I went and bought a box of these. These are sort of shiny car pads here, because they were nicely labelled up as to which pad did what, or you used it for what. I mean, it's actually got it written on the back of them, so you know you're going to get it right. So I bought a box of these and decided to use these. However, I discovered through trial and error that this sort of fake wool pad worked best with the compound, for me at least. This really seemed to get in there and sort of take the sort of oxidized layer of the paint off and shine it up quite nicely. This one I've washed, that's why it's all clean, but it would sort of be a reddy grey colour depending upon which part of the boat I was doing when I used this. So I just attached that to the rotary polisher here and sort of slowly worked away at 2 feet areas. So that was the pad that I used with the compound. I used this sort of fake lamb's wool pad that you can see here. Once I'd done that and I'd moved on to the polishing stage, what I used for the polishing stage was the polishing pad from Shiny Car, which you can see here. And there's links to all these products in the description below. So it says on the back here, polishing. So I knew I was using the right one. And then for applying the wax, what I used was the finishing pad, which is again cunningly labelled finishing pad for the wax. Now you might be thinking, what's the difference between these pads? Well, it's the sort of softness of the foam, which is kind of difficult to get across here, but this pad, which is the is the finishing pad, is much softer than the polishing pad. If I I can't really show it, but if I sort of press in on this, this is quite tough, whereas the wax applying pad is much more squidgy. There was a third pad in that set, which was the cutting pad, this white pad here, and that is even sort of tougher than the blue pad. I mean, again, it's difficult to show you that, but you know, there is a sort of toughness there. So that's the approach that I finally took. I washed the boat down. I then used compound with the lamb's wool sort of pad to remove the oxidized layer and sort of get back down to another newer layer of paint. Once I'd done that, wiping everything off with these cloths, don't forget the microfiber cloths, I then applied the polish, and for the polish what I used was the blue polishing pad. Here it says polishing pad on the back of it. So I used the blue pad with the polish, again working in small 2-foot areas, and again wiping down afterwards with these cloths. And if you didn't do the wipe down with the cloths, once it had been sitting there for a while and sort of dried, you could see streaks, so you had to come back over with these cloths. As I say, I had a huge number of these, and I just washed them out every so often, dried them, and could use them again. And then finally, the last thing that went on was the polish, the pure wax, sorry, not polish, the pure wax with this pad here, which is labelled finishing pad. I use that, again working in the sort of 2-foot square areas and buffing off with the microfiber pads, and I found that that worked really well. Now I will be making another video about boat polishing where I sort of try and condense all that I've learned down and show you the sort of steps using the various pads so that it's all sort of coherent and brought together. So keep an eye out for that. That'll most probably be a few weeks away because I'm waiting for some decent weather before I go and attempt to clean this side of the boat, which I haven't done yet, polish this side of the boat. So hopefully you found that interesting. If you have, please give it a big thumbs up and a like. And if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to the channel because it all helps. On the screen now, you'll see a QR code that takes you through to a newsletter about the grey wagtail. There's links for all the products that I've shown here and I've used in the description below, so if you want to get any of this stuff, go and have a look at the links down there. I get a small amount of money if you click on one of those links and buy them, by the way. The links will also be associated with the newsletter. So anyway, thanks for watching for this long. Hopefully, as I say, you found it interesting and useful. Bye for now.